Okay, hey, this is Dan with the Hemp Highway of Kentucky, and we're talking again with Colby Terrell at Zelios, and we're going to do a little bit more education about what goes on in extracting and refining and processing CBD, and some thoughts that Colby has about the future of the hemp industry and the hemp market. And so, without further ado, Colby, do me a favor, and for somebody like me who's never been in one of your facilities or really is really new to the whole idea of extraction, what is it you do? Is it better? Tell me the difference between the types of source material, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so I mean, what we do is we intake fresh biomass, and that's just a hemp crop basically. And depending on the farmer, depending on the situations, your CBD levels are going to vary. Obviously, we'd like to see 12, 13, 14, 15, 16%, but a lot of times it's around maybe 6 to 7 to 8. So there is a nice range of the not THC, but CBD percentages in the hemp biomass. But as we extract it, those levels will grow because we're combining and condensing those CBD. So if you start out with 10,000 pounds of CBD biomass, you extract it, you're going to come down to like I don't know, maybe 850 to 900 kgs of raw crude, and then after that, it'll get winterized, brought down to even smaller amount, about 450 kgs of crude. And then, so as you go through the process, your levels are going to increase as you're condensing those.
Okay, so I have seen different types of, and maybe it's more standardized now, but it seemed like at the beginning of this in 2016, there were people that were raising specific strains that were high CBD, and they tended to grow those all female, separated out, encourage the flowering. There were other people that were just planting mass. I don't want to mention anybody's names because I don't, but there were other people that were just growing, and they would take down the whole plant and kind of mill it into like a powder almost, and then start the extraction. And I know it has to be reduced, but I'm assuming that your 12 to 16% is just coming in as, it may not be clean to the leaves, but it's not coming in with stems in it or stalks, is it? I mean, how clean does it come in from your vendors?
It kind of just depends on some of the situations. Like, we do obviously prefer to have it, de-stemmed and de-stalked. And a lot of the times, if it could be pre-ground and pre-decarb, like, that's amazing, because all we have to do is pack the cans, fill them, load up the systems, and go. But yeah, I mean, like you said, we do have a big milling machine to where we can bring our biomass in if it's not already kind of pre-processed, and run it through there. And now the reason that we do a milling process is to break up that material to allow us a greater surface area during the extraction process, to let that solvent CO2 seep into every little pore. And even one step before that, after it's ground, we lay it on a bunch of little trays, roll it into a big oven, and let it decarb. And what that decarboxylation process is converting the CBDA percentage into a CBD percentage. Now, what a CBDA is the acid form of CBD. And that decarboxylation period converts the CBDA into CBD, increasing your active CBD percentage. So we do that every time before we even go into the extraction period, to make sure we're maximizing our potential CBD yields.
So when somebody talks about CBD and total CBD, they're looking at like the total CBD would be your CBD and perhaps your CBDA combined, because you're going to convert the CBDA into full on CBD. Is that correct? The decarboxylation.
Now, I mean, so it's that's going to be a case by case on who you're talking to. If they're implying that their total CBD percentage is including your CBDA,
right,
then that's kind of on them. But whenever I say our CBD percentage, it's going to be that percentage that's read off right next on the COA. And on the COA, it also has CBDA, CBV, CBG, CBGA, and stuff like that. So your total cannabinoid percentage would be a sum of all those other minors along with your CBD percentage. But total CBD, I assume that that's your activated CBD itself.
Okay, so you're testing that. If you've got a crude, well, you're decarboxylating the raw biomass, correct? That's the first step.
Right. I'm going to pull up a little COA and just double check what I said is correct.
Okay, and I'm just curious because I'm assuming that that isn't a 1-to-1 conversion. If you have 8%
Now there's a total.
CBDA, it's
So
not going to turn into 8% CBD. You're going to lose some during the process, or some isn't going to convert over.
right now that kind of gets a little bit deeper on the chemistry side. I don't know the exact conversion percentages. If you've got 5% CBDA, what's that going to transition into to CBD? But what I saw here on one of our COAs is it doesn't give you a total CBD percentage, but it gives you a total potential CBD percentage.
Okay, so that's fair enough. So that's kind of like,
Yeah,
if everything goes great, this is what could happen. That's
right.
that's kind of cool. That's fair. Um, okay, so the material comes in, it gets decarbed, and then it gets extracted. You all do critical CO2, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, let me give you kind of like a wide overview of the whole system in 4 or 5 little sections, and then you can kind of pick into those. So
Cool.
it gets brought in intake, and then material handling, which is the grinding and the decarbing and the packing the cans, and then extraction, winterization, distillation, and then isolation. And then you're at the end.
So, okay, cool. So winterization, I think you said last time, was taking out like the fat, the waxes and the lipids and stuff like that. What does that
Right. I
entail?
consider that. Yeah, so I consider that kind of like our bulk filtering stage. We're removing all the fats and lipids and kind of any of those auxiliary, plant material that we're trying to not have in a final product.
Okay. I noticed in the samples that you had that it kind of, you can see the material transform from a very dark to kind of like a honey looking type of material.
Yep. So, I mean, and you will notice that if some people may do a first pass on their distillate, a second pass, a third pass on their distillate, and every time what that is doing is just refining it even more, removing those extra terpenes or heads or minor cannabinoids and trying to just dial in that 90 plus or 85 plus CBD percentage distillate.
So are you all able to do anything with the materials that you remove like that, or do you do any terpene harvesting, or is that a different type of ballgame?
So we do have a large inventory of terpenes and kind of like some waste byproducts that needs to be destroyed and whatever. But at this point, there's not any kind of, well, at least here, some people may be trying to isolate from mother liquor and tails and stuff like that, because there are some residual minors in a relatively large CBD percentage left in that. So we're trying to figure out a way to utilize that and retain that extra CBD.
Nice, very nice. So I'm going to ask a question, kind of, and it's going to be difficult to really foretell because we're going through this health crisis. But leading into 2020, it seemed like there was a supply and demand situation going on with CBD and hemp, in that when it first started out, of course, nobody was growing or extracting, and prices were really high. And now things have kind of changed. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on, when things might stabilize. I know like a large state like Texas coming online, and I think there's certain things you can only do in Texas by their law or something, but that's a big state to have come online and all of a sudden have all sorts of farmers doing product. And what do you see going on with that? I mean, when do you see things kind of mellowing out?
Right. No, I mean, honestly, you're right. Texas is a big market. Personally, I'm excited to see them come online and what they can make happen down there. As for kind of the market environment and stuff like that, now, I mean, how many people jumped into the industry trying to make money and just do what they had to do to get it. And, a lot of things kind of fell through. A lot of contracts didn't go as planned. Like you said, there was no one really farming it at first. So it was really lucrative, very scarce. But then as a lot of people came in, more and more people just jumped into it. And then all of a sudden you have this overabundance, but then you have levels to it. Like not all CBD isolate is the same. And there's a lot of people out here slinging it. And the difference is some of these companies may have gone down. So they're not actually processing and producing every day, right? This could be just someone who had interest in that company. That company's dissolved. But now this guy, he's got X amount of kilos sitting in his warehouse or garage that's what he got away with. And now he's just trying to liquidate and get it gone. So like I said last week in our thing, it doesn't surprise me to see somebody 400, 350, 475, like below 500 for a kg, but it's just not sustainable because these, and I can't really pinpoint one person necessarily,
Right.
but this type of
But it makes
situation.
sense.
Yeah,
It's
type
when
of
those
situation
companies
is
go
not
under, it's an
maintainable.
asset that gets
Exactly.
divided up.
They don't have any reoccurring production to keep up with that inventory that they just sold. They're just trying to get it gone to get that extra cash flow. So and we're already starting to see it. Once these people start weeding out and their kind of low quality inventory, may even be high quality, it starts moving away. Those people are still going to be demanding isolate. And as companies or folks have just weeded themselves out, the people who have stayed strong and just kind of continue to dial themselves in and stay along the edge, hopefully that market and that price will bounce back. I've already seen some of the biggest players, like, they're holding it at 1,200. So I'm not worried.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that because it's been just brutal for a lot of people. And I think, like you said, a lot of people thought that it was just like the gold rush. And, it's gold was a finite resource in the ground. This is something you bring up from the ground so you can increase the volume of it. It was not going to last.
No, you're right. But the gold rush is kind of funny. I believe it is like that, but too many people getting too greedy.
Hey, y'all, this is Dan with the Hemp Highway of Kentucky, and I am here back with some folks from Zelios. And right now I have Corey Flynn, who works as a chemical engineer and an R&D specialist at Zelios. What exactly does that have you doing there?
So it's kind of a split two roles together. The chemical engineering side is focused on optimization, trying to find ways to make better efficiencies in our products, all the way from extraction through isolate, trying to get better yields, trying to use less energy, just trying to use less product loss. And then on the R&D side of it, we're just trying to find novel approaches to, again, for efficiency, like maybe see if there's a better way to crash out food or something like that. We'll just experiment with different methods to find one that we could potentially scale up to our full production level.
Okay, cool. So you kind of touched on a couple things there. When you're going through this looking at ways to be more efficient, in the earlier part of this interview, Colby was talking about how things get reduced by the grinder, and I know that there's going to be shrinkage, not just in terms of gross material, but also in CBD. But on the other end of things, you're trying to make the extraction part more efficient, or maybe even the reduction part. Tell me a little bit about how to prevent shrinkage and what sort of stuff and how you compensate for maybe destroying something over here by making it more available for extraction over here.
Yeah, one of the big thing that in this industry is in our plant is there's a lot of manual material handling, and a lot of that just leads to a lot of product transfer loss. So say we have some isolate that we need to grind to get it to our powder. Every time we put some into the grinder, every time we pour it out, some of it sticks behind, some of it falls out, some of it doesn't go into our final bucket that we put our isolate in. So example, like how would you optimize that? Well, you could, find a better method to grind it, a better method to sift it, like so none of the isolate can float up out of it when you're trying to filter it out. And like extraction, for example, you can choose there's a whole range of parameters. We use a supercritical CO2 extraction. I believe it is the preferred method. But you get to choose tons of parameters on that. You can choose your temperature and pressures for each of your separation tanks. You can choose the pressure that you have the main extractor vessel at. And those have big, big differences on the extraction properties of the supercritical CO2. And you don't even have to have it, all the way supercritical. We've experimented doing subcritical CO2 runs, having the pressure right below the critical pressure point on the phase CO2 diagram, and it has different properties about what it pulls out of the hemp. So say, for example, if you run really high pressure on an extractor, you'll get a bigger yield compared to a lower pressure, but that yield could be composed of more stuff than you want that's not just your CBD. Like it could pull more waxes out. And it might look better on paper, for example, like because you're putting bigger numbers down on your log sheets, but in reality, you need to optimize for a better CBD yield, because ultimately CBD or CBG, whatever cannabinoid we're working with at the time, that's what we're trying to isolate. So even if we get bigger numbers, having more of other stuff in there makes it harder in downstream processing. So there's a lot of things to optimize, trying to get that right blend for your production methods.
Okay, so that kind of brings me to another question, because now, in 2016 when all this started happening, 2014, 2015, that time when the first Farm Bill pilot program started happening, I mean, CBD was like very unknown, and now that's kind of mainstream, and we're talking about CBG and CBN and these other things. What exactly is CBG, and when you're extracting, can you get both CBD and CBG at the same time?
Yeah. So CBG is cannabigerol compared to CBD, which is cannabidiol. CBG is probably my favorite cannabinoid, simply because it is the precursor cannabinoid in the hemp plant before it's what turns into, let me back up. CBGA is what turns into THCA, CBDA, CBCA. It is the precursor cannabinoid. And it's super exciting. To answer your question, yes, when you're extracting, say you get a typical CBD, some CBD biomass in, you throw that through your extractor, you are going to have most likely amounts of CBG, because CBG is what made the CBD in your hemp. So not all of it probably converted. And that's why even in like CBD heavy strains, you'll still have, non-negligible amounts of CBN, CBC, and THC.
So if CBGA is a precursor to all these other cannabinoids, in my little mind, I'm thinking, well, gee, an intelligent chemist can manipulate it into anything they want, any cannabinoid they want. Is that factual?
Yeah, so I'm not certain on this, but I would imagine synthetic pathways probably start from CBG.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, and I'm not encouraging anybody in a state like Kentucky that does not allow certain things to try to convert their CBGA into anything other than CBD. But it does open some interesting possibilities as the industry grows, and what that could be used for as a building block.
Yep, and I think CBG is going to be the next big one, and then I think CBN, like you were talking about earlier, is going to be the one following that. I haven't heard too much about commercial CBC products yet, but I think it's going to be in that same pathway just a little bit down the line once they start getting high potency biomass grown.
So I wanted to step back a minute, because one of the things that is kind of new to me, and I knew there were different levels of extraction and purification, but certainly not as many as, like, when I've seen your all sample kit, it's like 5 different products from a crude to an isolate. What sort of applications are each of these different staged products good for? So if I have isolate, is that good for putting into, I don't know, my tincture? I think you kind of get what I'm saying. What's better for a lotion? What's better for a tincture? What's better for whatever, an edible?
So it kind of depends on what kind of effect you're going for. As you go through, you're really just isolating the CBD or your cannabinoid to be more isolated by itself. That's why we call the final product isolate. So for example, we've made tinctures with crude, we've made tinctures with winterized decarb crude, we've made tinctures with distillate and isolate. It just depends on what properties you're wanting that solution to give. So a big buzzword I think a lot of people in the cannabis and hemp industry would be familiar with is the entourage effect. And that is the combination of the terpenes and the small trace amounts of minor cannabinoids combined with your primary cannabinoid. So more commonly, we see in tinctures that people want that typically like a full spectrum kind of distillate that has high potency in a particular cannabinoid, but still has some terpenes and still has minor cannabinoids, because this entourage effect, it kind of just blends together to give a different kind of experience, different reactions happening. So, but typically typically crude and winterized, they don't always stay in solution the best. So most of the time when you're gonna do a tincture or something, you would want some pretty high potency, really wax-free distillate or some isolate.
Okay, well that makes sense. I mean, it just there's so many different levels, and I think most people may have experimented, or at a certain point, most people may have experimented with maybe straining some leaf through with some Everclear or something like that. But this is like a science beyond just what you do in your kitchen. That's for sure. And so hey, that brings me to another question. And recently there was a explosion and fire in California. And I have a feeling that it was probably not a legitimate company that was doing the extraction. It was probably, so I wonder if you could kind of talk a little bit about the safety things you all put in place so your product's pure and safe and your employees are safe in doing their jobs.
Yep, of course. As a chemical engineer, safety is, and in any production plant, safety should be over everything. It's nice to get good numbers out, but you need to make sure it's safe. So admittedly, there's a lot of places where if people who aren't the most trained at their positions, where stuff could go wrong. Example, in ethanol extraction, they use a very large amount of ethanol. And as people know, ethanol is very volatile, very flammable. It'll combust pretty easily, doesn't need much. So any kind of ignition source, if it gets too hot, an ethanol extractor has the potential. So you really need to make sure that there's good temperature control, good air circulation, so there's no vapors, stuff like that. And now, it's a little bit different for supercritical CO2, since CO2 is not flammable, it is an inert gas. The danger that lies with the CO2 extractor is the immense amount of pressure that these canisters are at. So, example, if you're running a CBD supercritical CO2 extraction line at 25 megapascals or something, that is an inordinate amount of pressure. It would, if one of those cans busted, it would undoubtedly probably break through the ceiling. You'd have to evacuate the whole building. And that's just one tiny little CO2 canister, not a giant array of extractor lines that have multiple canisters on each. So you just have to, reliability and training, of course, is always the way to ensure safety. And that's on the extraction side. Now, another big area where danger lies is, of course, winterization. A lot of people still use ethanol or other alcohol-based solvents for winterization. Again, kind of just like large quantities of flammable liquids is hard to control. And then probably the next biggest step is on isolate. Usually people are using some kind of alkane, be it pentane, hexane, or heptane. All three of those chemicals are extremely, extremely dangerous. They are very volatile, which means they will boil at low temperatures. And if it boils, that means it's in a gas form. And a gas form is what can ignite and turn into an explosion. So you just have to be super precautious to keep your solvents at a level where their vapor pressure, the amount of gas that they're letting off, is well below the regulations. There are So a lot of people talk about there's not like strict FDA guidelines out yet for the hemp processors, but the chemicals that hemp processors use are regularly used in well-regulated industries. So if you follow guidelines, you know how much vapor you have, you know what circumstances could lead to some devastating events. You just have to have these safeguards in place to prevent any of that to happen.
Cool. At that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up. I like talking about the safety, and I love that you brought in relying on the standards that are set in other industries. You're absolutely right. I mean, there's OSHA standards that deal with flammable and hazardous materials. Just because the FDA hasn't hit anybody on how they're handled in a particular setting in hemp doesn't mean the OSHA regulations aren't applicable. And I think that's a blind spot for a lot of people that are getting into this. So anyway, Corey, I don't want to cut you off, but I want to keep us in our half hour. Hopefully we'll get a chance to chat again.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Have a great day.